our Tisha B'Av shoes and shul because we're not supposed to put them on until after Baruch Hu.
All right. Okay.
So I think I got to bring my Tisha B'Av shoes to shul before Shabbos, or some people will just wear socks. Okay, so let's see where we're up to. So yesterday we were learning the halachas of Kamle B'Derabimine, and we were discussing whether or not Kamle B'Derabimine applies only if it's a Mises Bezdin, like the Tana of our Mishnah says, or if it even applies to Mises Kares. And we had two, and that was Reb Nechunya ben Akana, and we had two explanations where we know that Kamle B'Derabimine applies even to a Chiyuv Kares, according to Reb Nechunya ben Akana. And the Gemara says that Abaye said that we know it from the main Yosy, the main Makar of Kamle B'Derabimine. The main Makar of Kamle B'Derabimine is if someone punches an Isha Hara and the babies die, he has to pay Demei V'Lados to the father. But if the blow causes that the mother should die, then he does not have to pay for the V'Lados. If there's no tragedy and the woman is not killed, only then does he pay the Demei V'Lados. That's the makar of Kamle B'Derabimine. The question is how you define the word asain. So Abaye said that we look at asain when Yaakov told Yehuda, how can I let Binyamin go? What if there's going to happen to him an asain? And the asain means any type of tragedy that will happen to Binyamin, whether it was b'di Adam, whether it was b'dei Shemayim. So we see from here that even a misa b'dei Shemayim is considered an asain, which will pater somebody from paying mammon due to that same event. That was the makar that Abaye used. And that makar means any misa b'dei Shemayim. Doesn't make a difference if it's kares or if it's a standard misa b'dei Shemayim. Rava said the makar of Reb Nechunya ben Akana is from a pasuk that's referring to the moilech. If the pasuk says, if Klal Yisrael won't be mevayer dera, if Klal Yisrael won't give misa to a person who is over being maver zari lemoilech, then Hashem says, I will give him kares. So we learn from there that kares is equivalent to Mises Bezdin. But we only learned that kares is equivalent to Mises Bezdin from Rava's limud. But misa b'dei Shemayim would not be equivalent and wouldn't have come with B'Derabimine. So what's an example of a case where we might have Kamle B'Derabimine by a case of Misa B'dei Shemayim, where Abaye would hold that there is Kamle B'Derabimine, and where Rava holds there's not Kamle B'Derabimine? Zok Gemara Zor. I apologize. I mixed it up. I mixed up the shittas. It's exactly the opposite. Rava says it's. Maybe I didn't. Rava says it's only kares, and Abaye says it's even Misa B'dei Shemayim.
Isn't that the same thing?
Kares and Misa B'dei Shemayim?
Yeah.
I think kares is a more severe type of punishment. I think kares means the person dies earlier, and kares, his children are also nichras. His children also die. The Misa B'dei Shemayim, I think, he dies later. I think he dies at 50, so he dies before 50, he dies before 60, and it doesn't impact his children. So the Gemara says, in a case where you had a Zor Shachal Truma, that is the example. A Yisrael who eats Truma is Chayiv Misa B'dei Shemayim. But a Yisrael who eats Truma also has to pay back the Kohen because he ate the Truma of the Kohen. So here you have the Isser that's going to cause him to have Misa B'dei Shemayim, and the damage that he's doing to the Kohen that will trigger a Chiv Mammon, they occur simultaneously. That will be an opportunity for Kamle B'Derabimine. L'Abaye Potter, according to Abaye, who says any asain is going to pat you for Mammon, even Misa B'dei Shemayim, so the person would be Potter from paying in this case. U'lerava chayiv, and according to Rava, he would be chayiv. So Zok to Gemara, this is where we're up to now. But halfway down on Daf Lamed Amud Beis. So Frank the Gemara Ula Abaye Potter, are you going to tell me that according to Abaye, where even Misa B'dei Shemayim, will trigger kamle b'derabim minei. So in the case of zor shachal truma, the person is going to be potter, labai potter. V'amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda said, "Moida Rav Nechunya ben Akana, even Rav Nechunya ben Akana, who holds that you say kamle b'derabim minei by misa b'dei shemayim, but he agrees that begoin of chelboy shal chaveri. What if one steals the chelev that belonged to his friend, va'achloi, and he ate that chelev, which has a chiv chorus, shehu chayiv. There you'll be chayiv. You know why? Because the iser that caused him to be mechuyev chorus, and the damage which caused him to have to pay money did not occur simultaneously. Shekfar nischayev b'geneva koidim sheba l'dei iser chelev. The moment he picked up the chelev, he was koined and he was chayiv for the geneva. That's when his chayiv for mammon was triggered, but he wasn't chayiv chorus until when he actually ate it. Alma, we see the meidna, the agbe kanya. The moment he lifted it up, he was koina, and that triggered the chayiv mammon. But mischayiv v'nafshe lo hava ad achaloi until he eats it. So the chiyuvim came at different times. So there is no kamei b'derabim minei. Hachanami here too, when a zor takes truma of a kohen and then eats it, beidna the agve kanya. The moment he lifted up this truma with the intent to steal it, he has a kinyan geneva and he's chayiv on the toinsin, and therefore the chayiv moment has been triggered. But mischayiv b'nafshay lehava ad achalei. But he's not going to get the chayiv misa b'dei shemayim of eating truma until he actually eats it. So how could you suggest that even according to Abaye, that holds you will say kamli b'derabim minei by misa b'dei shemayim? That's only if the two things occur at the same time. But here, each chiyuv is being triggered at a different time. And for the Gemara, hacham b'may askinon, we're not just talking about someone who picked up truma to be kohen it and to steal it and then he ate it, because then you would be right. There's no kamli b'derabim minei there, because they're happening at different times. This case is kagoin shetochav loy chaveroi l'soich piv. His chaver picked it up, so he was never koined, and he pushed it in to the mouth with a long toothpick. He pushed it into the mouth of the perpetrator. So what effect does that have? So Rashi says, first of all, the person who's going to be chayiv misa b'dei shemayim, the eater, never picked it up and was never koined. So where is the chiyav tashlumin triggered? V'loy mechayiv tashlumin ela b'bliyasim. Where is the chiyav to pay the kohen triggered? When he swallows it. Therefore, b'bliyasim is chayiv. Why? What is if he never stole it? He's chayiv for demei hanoas meyav. He has to pay the hanoah that he had, the hanoah that he benefited from the truma, which is the hanoah that he was satisfied with the food of truma. V'loy demei kula, but he doesn't have to pay all of it because he did not take anything. All that happened was he had benefit. He didn't take anything at all. His friend put it into his throat. So he benefited from the kohen. The benefit, the act of benefit from the kohen triggers a chiv to pay what he benefited from the kohen. So let's say it's $5. The fact that he benefited, the truma might be worth $20, but he only had the benefit of the truma of $5. But at that moment where he had that benefit of $5, which triggered a chiv mammon, well, he shaita chiv misa namiika, because when he's swallowing it, that also triggers the chiv misa. So in fact, they do come at the same time. Frank Gemara, that's not true, because soif, even the law say kanya. At the end of the day, even if his friends put the food into his mouth, he has to chew it. So while he's chewing it, now he's koined it. He's lifting it up in his mouth. So he's still being koined it first. Yet mischayiv b'nafsher lo hava adabola, but he's not going to be mechuyev misa till he actually swallows it. Zok the Gemara, kegoyin shetachav loy l'toich beis abliya. His friend didn't just take a long toothpick and put the truma into his mouth. Rather, he put the truma into his friend's throat. He actually put it right down his throat. So he never even had a chance to chew it in his mouth. Oh, thank you so much. He never even had a chance to chew it in his mouth. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of how this ended up down his throat. Let's think about it. If the friend put the truma so far down, not so far down his throat that he can still it up, right? He can still get it up. Well, then niheder, let him push it back up. Rashi says, and if he had the option, if when the friend put it into his mouth or his throat, wherever it was, he still had the option of getting it out of his throat, and he decided on his own that he didn't want to do that, well then he shaita iu mazikla. He is being mazik the coin. The Rishon lav midi ovid. The Rishon didn't do anything. He just put it into the guy's throat. But this guy, when it's in his throat, he has the option at that moment of either swallowing or spitting it out. He decides to swallow. He was mazik now, the kohen. The first person was not nischayev l'kohen. Who was nischayev l'kohen? The second person, because he had the option of getting it out of his throat, and he didn't. So once again, the moment came before he swallowed it. And Eloi motil hadure, and if it was so far down his throat that he couldn't possibly have brought it back, amai chayiv, why is he chayiv? So this line of the Gemara, Rashi and Tosfos have a disagreement as to how to learn it. Rashi says, amai chayiv, the question is, amai chayiv misa onusu. If someone puts something so deep into your throat that you can't possibly bring it up, how could you be chayiv misa b'dei shemayim? You couldn't, you had no choice. You were anointed. The reason why Tosfos doesn't like this pshat is because Tosfos says, why don't you say it's speaking where a person put it so far down my throat where I couldn't stop it? But I wanted him to do that. So that's not any more anointed. So therefore you would still have the Chiyav Misa and the Chiyav Mammon occurring at the same time. So Tosfos explains that in such a case, there wouldn't be a Chiyav Mammon at all. And that's why you're putter. It's a long Tosfos. The Re says, "Amai chayiv mammon vareyu gozloi." He didn't steal it, and he shouldn't be mechuyev for the hana either. He shouldn't have mechuyev from the hana either. Why? Because by the time I had enough from it, it was already too far gone. Once something's down my throat, any damage that the kohen would suffer is suffered already. At that point, when it goes down my throat and I benefit from it, that's not called me taking anything away from the kohen. So regardless, the Gemara is saying you don't have a case where the Chiyav Mammon aligns simultaneously with the Chiyav Misa. So Zok the Gemara, so what is the case? The case was where it's very far down my throat. But even if I regurgitate it, it won't be worth anything. And Rashi says, the nami ahadra, if it's so far down your throat and you are able to chach it up, it's going to be disgusting at that point. You cannot give that back to the Bible. You can't take something that was so far down your throat and give it to the Bible. Vice the Reis. Hilchach, you don't tell him. Hilchach, migzel loy gozla. Come to Reis that the person who's swallowing it never stole anything from this person because it wouldn't be worthwhile anyway, even if he brought it back up. So therefore, so what is the reason? What is the trigger to be mechayiv the person who swallowed this grain to pay? It's a hanos groina umeyav. There's a hana that he has, so he's being henna from this kohen because he's enjoying the swallowing and the fact that he's satisfied. So that's when the Chiyav Mammon is triggered. Well, at that very same moment, Zok Rashi, he shaita Chiyav Misa ika. So the Chiyav Misa as well. So in such a case, there Abaye would hold that you say Kamli b'derabim minei because it's Chiyav Misa, and Rava says there wouldn't be a din of Kamli b'derabim minei because by Misa b'dei Shemaim you don't say it. Rav Papa Amar, I have a different case. It's speaking not where there's a solid where you could spit it out, where your chaver sprayed, let's say, wine of truma into your mouth. Once it's in your mouth, it's not recoverable anymore. So Rashi, mashkan shel truma, don't be doichik to say it's speaking where you put grain so far down my throat where it only can come up like that. No. Speak about liquids. The moment you put wine or any other liquid into somebody's mouth, im asala, that's no longer recoverable. And therefore you cannot be mechayev, the swallower, because of gzela, because the haloi chazal amidi, when he had any type of control, it was already in his mouth, and at that point it was worthless. So what could we be mechayev him for? Elahanos groine umeyav. He did benefit from the kohen. That's what he did mechayev. Elahanos groine umeyav mechayev. But when he's swallowing and he's having that anos groine and meyav, that's the point where the chiv misa b'deshemayim is triggered. Umisa b'tashlumin boim ke'echad. They both come at the same time. So we have two options to consider for why, when someone ate truma, the misa and the chiv mammon come at the same time. Rav Ashi offers a third explanation, which is a little bit out of the box. And he said, who said that the chiv misa and the chiv mammon have to be coming from the same place? Maybe they're coming from two separate places, but they just have to occur at the same time. Rav Ashi Amar bezor shachal truma mishaloi. The zor could have eaten his own truma. He was mafish truma. He hasn't yet given it to the kohen, and he ate that truma. There'll be a chiv misa, but no chiv mammon. Where is the chiv mammon coming from? Vikara shiroin shel chaveroi. At the same moment that he was swallowing and he was invoking upon himself a chiv misa b'dei shemayim, at that moment he was mazik his friend's beged. So they're happening at the same time, and there'll be a kamlei b'derabbanan.
Anyone's beggar or the beggar of the friend?
Anyone's. So look what Rashi says. Vikar shirayim b'shah shaboila. He was multitasking. He was going to do two averes at once. He was going to multitask. The avagav the misa lav mishum mamana the nizik al. Even though the chiv misa that he has nothing to do with the fact that he damaged somebody's beged, nevertheless, mifter, he'll be potter simply because both these chiyuvim were triggered at the same time. Ushvedla the Rabashi, and Rabashi holds misa lazev tashlumin lazev. If the misa is triggered from one area, from one place, the tashlumin is triggered from a different place, potter, it would be potter. Gufa.
Misa lazev tashlumin lazev means it comes from other places, or because of here, or it has to pay for one
The chiv misa is coming because of one aver, and the chiv tashlumin is coming because he was.
Misa, not luze. Kure shlum shechavar means he has to pay for his chaver.
Correct.
And uchel trume
Is that's not coin. That's a ben adam lamakim. It's referring to the aver of ben adam lamakim. He doesn't owe the coin anything. It's a ben adam lamakim. Because there's no chiv to any coin there because it didn't belong to any specific coin. That's right. But no one could want him.
Right, but that's why it says lose.
Okay. Now Tosfos has a whole kasha on Rashi, and as you can see, it's a long Tosfos because Tosfos holds it shouldn't be considered. This case shouldn't be considered misa lazevet ashlumin lazeh because they're both an avera. They're both dealing with your bunch. So Tosfos has a lot of Torah on it. Okay, let's see the Gemara right there. Gufa. Omar Reb Chisda said, Moida Reb Nechunya ben Akona. Reb Nechunya ben Akona is Moida that you don't say kamlei b'derabim begoin of chelbei shal chaver. If you stole your friend's chelev, so the iser geneva came first, be'achloi, and then you ate it, which is the chi of kares. Shehu chayiv there he'd be chayiv. The moment shekfar nischayiv begeneva koidim sheyavoy lidei iser chelev, because the chi of geneva came before the iser chelev. Zok Gemara lema pliga dirabavin. Let's say that Reb Chisda is arguing Rabavin. The Amar Rabavin has zoyrik chaitz mitchilas arba l'soif arba. If somebody on Shabbos was mavir an arrow 4 amis in Rosh Hashanah, which is in the Raisa, so he threw a chaitz from the beginning to past 4 amis, And as it was traveling through the air, Vikara Shiroin Balichasai, it punctured someone's sheet that was hanging on his clothesline in midair. Potter, that person will be potter because of Kam Leber Drabim. Why? Shakira Tzarech Hanachi, because Akira is Tzarech Hanacha. And Rashi says a beautiful pshat. Shakira Tzarech Hanachi, Hilchach, Afagav the Chiv Maman, Mekamei Hanacha Asilei. When is the Mechuyev Misa? You need to have an Akira and a Hanacha. The arrow has to land after 4 amas to be Mechayev Misa. But the damage occurred in midair. So the Chiv Maman has occurred even before the Chiv of Misa. Nevertheless, it's potter because of Kam Le B'derabimnei. Hoyel uvein Akira v'Hanacha Asilei. Since this action of damage occurred between the Akira and the Nacha, we consider it Misa v'Tashlumen Boim Ke'echad. We consider it that the Misa and Tashlumen did occur at the same time. Shakira Tzarech Hanachi, Akira Tzarech Hanacha, and now comes the most important key words of Rashi. Umeyahi Shaita Aschel Ela Malacha. So Rashi is saying the Malacha starts at the Akira. It's a long Malacha, and it extends from the Akira through the Hanacha. You don't say that there's no Malacha done at all until right before the Hanacha, and the whole Malacha vert keton by the Hanacha. No, it's a long Malacha. It starts at the Akira, it ends at the Hanacha. And in the middle, during this act of doing a Malacha Shabbos, you damage somebody, that's called that it's occurring at the same time.
So hypothetically, it could never land.
There's no Hanacha, you're not chayav. Yeah. Zok Gemara, Hachanami. So here too, when you picked up the chaylev to eat, Hagba tzorich achilei. Why did you pick up the chaylev? Because you were planning to eat it. So if that's the case, the Hagba was part of the achila, and therefore, why don't you say the same halacha and say that this is considered to having occurred at the same time? And you would say Kamei b'derabimnei. So this is a raya that Rav Avin disagrees with Rav Chisda, because according to Rav Avin's logic, there should be a Torah of Kamei b'derabimnei in this case as well. Zok Chaim, it's not the same thing, and the Gemara agrees with you. Zok Gemara Hachi Ashta Hasam iEvshir lahanacha b'lo yakira. In that case, it would be impossible to have the hanacha 4 amas away without being oikerit 4 amas before. So the whole malacha is one big package deal. But a hacha, efshir lachila b'lo hagba. You can eat chaylev without hagba. You never had to pick it up in the first place. You never needed to make the independent geneva. Why? The ibai gachen v'achel. He could have bent down and ate the chaylev where it was without lifting it up. So Rashi the ibai gachen lamata megibel tvachim. He could have went below gibel tvachim where he's not even picking it up. V'achel, and he couldn't have eaten it. Ubot megimel av hagboi. Since it's less than 3 tvachim, it's not even a hagbah. So if that's the case, he could have. So they're not connected, and he wouldn't have been kind at all. That's right. They don't have to be connected. Inami.
He be coined before he swallow.
Correct.
Once he swallows it, he's coined. But the act of kinyan happens. The genaive would happen when he picks it up 3.
But at the end of the day,
then it's called.
I don't need to delve into whether he'll be koined when he swallows. It's not relevant. What's relevant is the hagbah when he picked it up. In the case where he picked it up and then took it, you cannot connect the 2 actions because the hagbah is independent.
Right, but here, if he bends down and he eats when he swallows, he's koined and he's silent.
But that's not relevant. That's not relevant to me. That's not relevant. All that's relevant is if you picked it up first, that's not connected to that.
Right.
That's all that's relevant. So I don't need a bus. I don't want to analyze that. I don't have time. All I need to know is that if someone picked it up and then ate it, that's not called Kamei b'derabimnei. We want to clear now what would be there. That's a very nice clear, but that's not the actual Gemara.
When he does swallow it in the same time, when he's going to.
There's a minish nagaya. All that's nagaya is Reb Chisda had a case where you picked it up. Reb Avin had a case. I'm sorry, Reb Chisda had a case where you picked it up first and then you ate it. That's not connected. That reminded to me that when you pick it up, it's not connected. So Mamela, there's no Kamei b'derabimnei. But by throwing it, you had to do that. It's part of the malacha.
Just a little bit. I don't want to go too far off topic, but to be mechuyev for an Isser Shabbos, don't you have to do the malacha like it was originally done? They didn't shoot arrows. in the Mishkan. How is this even is her deraisa that you
Shaila. Midaraisa, anything you pick up and you carry it for Amish Rosh Hashanah.
carry it for Amos? You're not carrying it here. You have to pick it up, carry it, and put it down.
So it's funny that you bring that up. It's funny that you bring it up because that opens up a whole different Shaila, because there's a famous man, his name was Ben Azai, and he said Mahalach Ka'imid. He said that every step you take is an Akira and a Hanacha. So they ask, according to Ben Zoyma, according to Ben Azai, it's impossible to ever have someone be mechuyev for carrying something for Amos and Rosh Hashanah, because every step is a new Akira and a new Hanacha. So they learn pshat in Ben Azai that how could you be over, be mavid al Amos Rosh Hashanah, either throwing it or jumping. Those two are the only two ways to be over. So you clearly a class A violation of Maver Dal Rams B'Shus Rabim would have to include that. Otherwise, it would be impossible. Did they do?
That's according to Ben Azai.
Did they throw things for Amos by the Mishkan? I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. I thought it was unloading the wagons. Isn't that the Akira?
That's Mochi Mishus L'Shus.
Oh. Okay.
Because the wagons were Shus HaYachid and they were going into a Shus Rabim. So that's more Idami, or you could say Hasam Iboy Lahadura Leimotzim Hadala. When you shoot an arrow, once you pull that trigger, you cannot take it back, which means that the full action of your shooting that arrow is all done in that moment. Therefore, it's also considered Kam Lei B'derabimine. Rashi says, "Loimotzi ladur mishazork esachetz hilchach mishas akira soifai lekroy lo shiroyin." We consider that he tore the shiroyin the moment he pulled the trigger, because everything that comes out of that pulling of the trigger is attributed to that moment when he pulled the trigger. But hacha, in the case of picking up the chaylev before he ate it, motzi mahadala, he could have easily put it back down. We don't say that the achila already started when he picked it up, because you can actually sever the two actions. Zok to Gemara, we have over here two terutzim to be mechalik between Rab Avin's case of Zoyrek and Rab Chista's case of Oichel. One is that the chila of the chaylev had nothing to do with the gneva, because he didn't even have to pick it up in order to eat it. That's one difference. The other difference is you could stop in between picking up and eating the chaylev, but you can't stop after you pull the trigger. So ma'ika in high lishna, the high lishna. What's the difference in the halacha between these two approaches? Zok to Gemara, ika beinayu hamavir sakin b'shus harabim. If someone is walking with a knife in rishus harabim, v'kara shiroyin balichasai, and he tore shiroyin, he was carrying a sakin. He lifted up, he carried it 4 amos, and he put it down. And as he was walking with it, he tore shiroin. So this is something that he could have stopped in the middle, but you still say akira tzarich hanachi, that it's one big malacha. So according to the first lashon, where we say that it's impossible to do the hanacha without the akira, because it's one malacha, and therefore we would still say that there's a kamalei b'derabimine on the shiroin that he tore with the knife as he was walking. But according to the lashon that says the reason why it's one malacha is because once you pull the trigger, you cannot stop it anymore, and therefore everything that the trigger pulling causes is one big action. Here, when he's walking with a knife, where he could have easily stopped after the akira, and therefore it would not be considered kamalei b'derabimine. Beautiful. Zog to Gemara gufa. Let's analyze. I'm sorry.
He has to pay for both.
What do you mean both?
Shiroin and lease.
I mean pay. Not go. Pay with his life. Gufa zog to Gemara. Amar Abavin hazor chaitz mitchilas arba l'soif arba. Someone shot an arrow. The kara shiroin balichasai, and in midair, as it was traveling, it tore shiroin. Potter, that's going to be a case of kamalei b'derabimine. That's considered that it happened simultaneously. Shakira tzarich hanachi. because we consider anything from the Akira to the Anacha as one moment. Most of Rabbi Barabai. Rabbi Barabai had a kash on this. It says a goin of kiss b'Shabbos. If someone steals a wallet full of money, a bag full of whatever, on Shabbos, chayiv, he will be mechayiv in moment. So just imagine for a moment what would occur. He'd go into someome's property, he'd pick up a kiss, and then he would have to walk out of the property with that kiss. So there he'll be chayiv on the moment, even though he's being mechayiv on Shabbos for being moitzi the kiss from a shus hayachid to a shus harabim. Why? Shekvar nischayiv v'geneva kodim shiyavilu the yisr skila, because he's chayiv for the geneva. Rashi says lishalim the hagbah koine b'chal. He was koine the gzela even in the rishus of the nigzal. At that point, once he lifts up this item that he's stealing, even though he's still in the rishus hayachid, he's chayiv for geneva. He's not over the Chiv Shabbos until he crosses the border and puts it down.
If he puts it back down before he leaves, he's chayiv b'neva?
I believe so, because he was coined already. Yeah, once he's coined, he's mechuyev anointed. Now the question is, what's considered a chazara?
Yeah.
So it's possible that putting it back into his chaver's chotzer is a chazara. That's a whole sugya in Masechet B'Masiyah.
Before he leaves, so I'm saying therefore there's a potential that
If it's a chotzer, it's any mishtameres, and it won't be coined it back for the nigzal. It's not so simple that the chazara is good just because I put it back.
yeah,
I
but it's not
found
so
it.
simple that it's at the same time.
It's for sure not at the same time.
Should not at the same
That's exactly what the Gemara is saying. It's for sure not at the same time. So that's why Rabbi Abaye said that if you steal a kiss on Shabbos and then you walk out with it, you'll for sure be mechuyev. Because the geneva happens as soon as you lift it up to kiss, but you're not over in a chiv Shabbos until you walk out into Rosh Hashanah and put it down. What happens if he didn't lift the kiss up? Rather, he was dragging it out. So there he was never kind of the kiss until he pulled it out of the Rishus HaYochid. There'll be potter, because then Shari Yisra Shabbos ugeneva boim kechad. There they occurred at the same time. Zokt Rashi, he never lifted it up and was koinit b'shus habaylim. The kinyan was when it left the Rishus habaylim, there it's potter because the Isra Shabbos and the Isra Geneva are coming at the same time. Frag the Gemara b'amai hachanami here too leimahagba tzorech haitzahi. Why am I lifting it up? I'm only lifting it up because I want to take it out. So just like by the Akira l'tzorech hanocha, by the arrow, we say it's one big action. We should say this is all one big action because I'm making the Akira in order to make the hanocha, and anything that happens in between is all going to be considered simultaneously. So it's Rashi v'mai ki igbir b'shus habayil v'kanoi amai chayiv neima mishas hagba askala haitza. Since the malacha has already started, so the Isra Gzela is occurring at the same time. Zokt Gemara hacha b'mai askinon kagoin shehegbioi al manas latznioi. When he lifted it up to steal it, he wanted to steal it, yes, but he wasn't planning to take it out of the Rishus HaYochid. He was planning to hide it away somewhere in the property of the owner who he's stealing it from, and then he figured he'll come back later and retrieve it. So he was only planning to do an Isra Gzela, and he was never planning to do an Isra B'Tzah Shabbos. And then v'nimlach alav v'haitziyai. And then he changed his mind and he decided to take it out. So the Akira was not an Akira for the Malacha. and therefore the Chiv Misi didn't come in. So Frank Gemara, I don't understand. In such a case, if when he originally picked it up, his intent wasn't there to take it out, and that's why you want to say that the Geneva is severed from the Malacha, well, in such a case, he shouldn't be chayiv for Shabbos either. Because if he picked it up with the intention of putting it back down in the same Rishus, and then after he picked it up with a compromised Akira, because the Akira was done without ever having an intent to take it out, and now he decides to take it out, so that you only have the traveling on the Anocha, but you don't have the Akira, because the Akira was done with the wrong intent. What if someone is in his house and he's moving things around in his house from side to side, from corner to corner, and then after he picked it up with the intent of not taking it out of the Rishus, v'nimlach aleim v'yaitzion. And after he made the akira, he thought, you know what? Maybe I'm going to take it now to the Rishus Harab. There he's potter. You know why? Akira because when he originally picked it up, his intent wasn't to be moitziit mirshus l'shus. So of course, there's no kamli b'derabim here because there is no chiv misa. Let's not say that when he originally picked it up, when he stole it, he was planning to hide it there. Of course, his intent was to take it out, which means the original akira that he stole the object with was also a proper akira for the chiyuv of Shabbos. We're back to our original problem that the malachas occurred at the same time. He stopped. Instead of going right out, he stopped. And Rashi says, when he stops, the moment he stopped walking towards the exit, that ends his first action. So his first action was merely stealing it, and that action ended. Now, where does the Isra Shabbos come? His first lifting up the object with the intent to steal it didn't bring with it a Chiv Shabbos. But when he picked it up the second time, once it was already in his hand, and now he started moving again towards the door, that was considered the Akira that was part of the Malach of Shabbos. After he stopped, he decided to start moving again. That was the Akira. The Akira's Gufa, Akira's Chayfetz. So Zok Gemara, he stopped. That's why there's no Kamle B'derabim. Zok Gemara, it makes a huge difference why this fellow stopped. Ila Kasef, if he stopped because he wanted to readjust the position of the parcel on his shoulder, that's not even called stopping. Urchehu, that's not even called stopping, Dr. Rashi. Ve'ein amidosai hanocha levata lakira rishoina melech Shabbos. We look at that he was continuing to move because that's all part of the activity of carrying something out. It must be that he stopped to rest. If he stopped to rest, so that broke his original akira and hanocha. And now, the Geneva happened in that Akira Nacha, but no Isur Shabbos occurred. Now he's making a new Akira. So are you going to suggest that if he stopped just to rest, we don't consider that as having stopped, and we consider one big Akira Hananacha, and we consider it like the Geneva occurred within that period of time between the Akira and the Nacha? If that's the case, then Adatani, we have a brisa that gives a case where you're going to be potter from Kamei B'Rabnei, which is where you picked it up first. And then the second case is, and where will there be a Kamei B'Rabnei? When do the two Yisurim happen simultaneously? Only if you were dragging it out. Frek the Gemara, why did you go to a case of dragging it out to find a case where you have Kamei B'Rabnei? Adatani, how you Megar V'Yotze potter, you didn't need to go to such an extreme case. You could have stuck to a case where you lifted it up, and you would still have the two Yisurim occur simultaneously. Where do we say that the Isur Gneva came before the Isur Malacha? And therefore there's no Kamei B'Rabnei by Midlafush. If he stopped to rest, because then when he stopped to rest, that stopped the first Maisa, which is the Gzela, and now the second Maisa, which is the Tzor, is a completely separate Maisa. But if he only stopped to adjust his parcels, that's not considered having stopped at all, and therefore it was one big malacha, and it would be potter. So why did we need to go to a case of Megar V'Yotze, which is a much different case than carrying it? Elahomani ben Azahi. Elamai, we have to say that we're going according to the Shita of Ben Azai. The Omar Mahalach Ko'imudami. Ben Azai says Mahalach is Ko'imud. Every step one takes is a new Akira and a new Anoch. And therefore, so Rashi, we have to be chayzer from our original pshat because of this kasha, lift like v'lisabdidah. And it's speaking where he didn't stop. So if he didn't stop, so why isn't it one big isser? So Rashi, Vafilochi, Chiv Shabbos, the Akira, Lav Makmas Akira Rishoina, Dagba Asilo. The Akira that was triggering the Chiv Shabbos was not when he picked it up in the property of the Nigzal, it was the last step he took as he was walking out. So according to Benazai, it makes perfect sense because even though he picked it up there and he walked straight out the door, every single step that he took was an independent Akira Nanocha. So once again, according to Benazai, the two actions, the Gzela and the Isser Shabbos, did not occur at the same time. Frank Gemara, we still have the same problem. Avol Zoyrik Mai. What would have been, according to Benazai, if he throws it? If he throws it, then it would be one big action, even according to Benazai. Avol Zoyrik Mai Potter. Frank Gemara, if that's the case, once again, Niflog v'nisnibidida. Where do we say that the Geneva is independent of the Yitzia? That's if he was walking step by step, and you have Ben Azai who holds every step is a new Akira. Avol Zoyrik, but if he threw it, even according to Ben Azai, it will be Potter. So why did we go to a case of Megarer to say that the Malachas occurred at the same time? Why didn't we use a case of Zoyrik to say that the Malachas occurred at the same time, which is still closer to carrying it than Megarer is, than dragging it? Zok Gemara, I'll tell you why the Tana Bedafke wanted to go to a faraway case of Megarer v'Yotzei. Megarer v'Yotzei Strichle. The Tana picked the case, even though it's not the closest case, but there was a reason why he picked the case of Megarer v'Yotzei. Because you might have said that it's not the usual way to take something out of a person's rishos. The normal way is not to drag it. So that's called done with a shinui. And if it's done with a shinui, there would be no chiyuv of malacha Shabbos because it was done with a shinui. Kamash Malon, that dragging something is also a legitimate way of moving something around, and therefore you're chai for Shabbos.
Especially when you want to steal it and want to run away fast.
Oh, okay. But the Gemara drills down even deeper. Uvamai. Exactly what type of object is not the derech to drag? Iber Ravari, if it's a huge object, or if it's a huge object, if it's a dresser, no one lifts the dresser up on the shoulder. He uses a dolly and he drags it out. So that's for sure the derech. Iber Zertri, if it's a little wallet, lavorchi, no one's going to pull a wallet on the floor. Ella, it has to be bimitzi. It's a object that's big enough that a person might drag, but it's small enough that a person might carry. So it can go either way. And in a case where it can go either way, the chiddush of the brisa is that dragging it is considered a first-class way of removing it, and it would still trigger an Isser of Shabbos. Now we need to go back to the case. He went into Rosh Hashanah and took someone's item. Where did he take this item to? You want to say that there was a Chiv Shabbos here? Well, where did he drag it to? If he dragged it into Rosh Hashanah, okay, is there Shabbosika? I understand why there's an Isser Shabbos, because you drag something from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos. But Isser Geneva, there's no Isser Geneva. You know why? Because if you drag something into Rosh Hashanah, how are you koine it? Mishicha is only koine if you pull it into your Rishus. Or if you pull it into a semi, like a simple, you pull it into a quasi Rosh Hashanah. But pulling it into Rosh Hashanah doesn't prove anything. Hagba, when it's in your hand, that works even in the Rosh Hashanah Nigzal. But if you're dragging it and you're making a Mashiach, you weren't kind it. So once again, we have a problem. How are these two things occurring at the same time? And if he dragged it, let's say from his neighbor's house to his house, directly over the property line, not going through a Rosh Hashanah, well then Isser Geneva Ika, you definitely have your Isser Geneva, but it's a Shabbos Leka. Because Midaraisa going from one Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah is not a problem Midaraisa.
Shicha doesn't work in Shisarabim?
No. The case is the Afke Litzide Rosh Hashanah. He didn't pull it straight into Rosh Hashanah. He went into an area that's called Tzide Rosh Hashanah, and we learned already what Tzide Rosh Hashanah is. People used to build their houses right up to the property line. So if you have a guy rushing down the street with his big wagon, it's going to scratch his walls. So what they would do is they would put rocks and sharp things out for about a couple of feet on the floor right out of their house. So now people aren't going to want to drive over that area and damage their things. So it's a way to keep someone far away from damaging his walls. So that's an area where technically it's Rosh Hashanah, but it's not such a busy place, and the Mashiach would work into that place. and the case was he dragged it from the Rishus HaYachid into Tzidei Rishus HaRabim. So therefore, there's a Chiyav Misa of Shabbos because it's technically Rishus HaRabim, and he's cutting it because it's not Mamash Rishus HaRabim. Uchaman Zoktumar. Whose shita is this theory following? Ikar Rabbi Eliezer. If you want to say it's going according to Rabbi Eliezer, Damar Tzidei Rishus HaRabim Kirishus HaRabim Damu. Well, then Isser Shabbos Ika, you'll have the Isser Shabbos, but Isser Gneva Leka, because Rabbi Eliezer considers Tzidei Rishus HaRabim like a regular Rishus HaRabim, and therefore there would be no kinyan. Ika Rabbanon, Darmi Tzidei Rishus HaRabim Lav Kirishus HaRabim Damu, and if you're going to look to the Rabbanon that it's not considered Rishus HaRabim, well then Isser Gneva Ika, you'll have your Isser Gneva because it's not you're pulling it into a place that's not a Rishus HaRabim, but it's a Shabbos Leka. So we need a hybrid where there would still be an Isser, would there be an Isser Shabbos, but you'd still be koina. A Carmelist might be the same thing. I don't know. I don't know the halach of a Carmelist. If you would be koina or not, I'm not sure. So Zok the Gemara, la'olam k'Rabbi Eliezer. Let's say we're going to Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that this is considered a Rishus HaRabim. So if it is considered a Rishus HaRabim, how are you koina it? V'chiyama Rabbi Eliezer tzidei Rishus HaRabim k'Rishus HaRabim damu. Legabi, what halacha did Rabbi Eliezer say that tzidei Rishus HaRabim is like Rishus HaRabim? Hanimi li inyan chiyuva de Shabbos. That's only legabi Shabbos that someone's chayav for bringing something from a Rishus HaYachid into Rishus HaRabim, even though he only brought it into the tzidei Rishus HaRabim. Why? People normally will avoid that area, but if there's a big crowd on the street, if there's a lot of traffic, people are going to go even on the rough shoulder. Mikna kani, but lemaisa, it's still a place that's not busy enough that would prevent a kinyan from occurring. My taima the halosh chichi rab. So therefore, this area is a hybrid area. It's a Rishus HaRabim legabe achiv Shabbos, but it's not a Rishus HaRabim legabe kinyan, and therefore that would have been the case where he dragged it into tzidei Rishus HaRabim, where the Isser Shabbos and the Isser Gneva comes at the same time. Rabbi Ashi Omar, it's kagoyin shetzirif yodoi lamata mishloisha v'kibloi. He pulled it into Rishus HaRabim, but he had his hand there. So Rashi says, kagoyin shetzirif yodoi hashniya, his second, with one hand he was pulling with this thing that he was stealing, and the other hand he had right on the other side of the property line, Rishus HaRabim, and he pulled it straight into his hand. Lapachos mishloisha samach lekarka. It was within 3 of the karka, because you need to have a hanacha as well. So it was within 3 of the karka. So it fell into his hand. Your hand is a kinyan no matter what, even if it's just a rabbin. And since you're within 3 tfachim of the ground, it's also considered a hanacha. So you have a case where even in your rabbin, you're koinit, and it triggered a chiv Shabbos. Kidarava, Domarava, Yodesh Halodam, Cheshuva loy karba al arba. Rava holds that the hand of a person is like a mokim dalid al dalid, and therefore it's considered a hanacha even though it's only on your hand. Let's see Rashi. Rashi says, "Kidarava Domarava Yodesh Halodam Cheshuva loy hanacha Shabbos lagabi requiring a hanacha. The hand is a place where you can make a hanacha. It's just like mokim arba arba. It's just like a place that's 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim, which we say is a place that you need to have a hanacha. The Shabbos choshev mokim, the same way we consider it a place. Lin Shabbos lin mikni nami choshev mokim. It's considered a mokim lagabe bin kohen as well. Lemikni ki'ilu had bia l'mayla mishlosh, as if he had lifted up and made a hagbah, and therefore it's a good kinyan even in Rishus HaRabim. Umiyu b'Rishus HaYachid lo yagba, but he never made a hagbah in Rishus HaYachid. The tikni that it should be kanyit, the tikni lay mekama the lesachi of Shabbos alay, but he never made the kinyan in the rishus of the yachid. He made the kinyan right when it crossed the border, because we need to align it so that the chiv Shabbos and the chiv Gneva came at the same time. Ubiyasa l'shus harabim ukniyasa boim ke'echad ulahachim mishani. Why did the Gemara say kishet siref l'tehav hagbah b'shus hayachid? That's why the case had to be where you had your hand right at the property line and you dragged it out of the Rishus HaYachid into your hand. Because if your hand was in the Rishus HaYachid a little bit, then the kinyan would have happened before the Isser Shabbos had occurred, and that would have been a problem. Okay, it's 6:53. We're up to Rab Acha over here. So we'll stop here. And we'll be Mamshech and Mitzvah on Shabbos we're still good enough that we should be able to finish Daf Lamed Beis, which is Tisha B'Av's Daf. We should be able to finish at a time. So we'll stop here. We'll be Mamshech Misham tomorrow.
Go ahead.
So 5:30.